So my name's Lynda Ozan, and I'm the Deputy State Historic Preservation Officer. Our office is located in this building. We're a division within the Oklahoma Historical Society. So they asked me to discuss today some creative ideas for funding. Now I gave this presentation, if any of you attended the CCC kickoff meeting in February. I gave a very condensed version of this because they only gave me 10 minutes to talk about funding and how much can you really say in 10 minutes. So today's a little bit longer, and we're going to talk about some creative ideas and different ways that we can fund projects. So, fundraising comes in many formats. Themed galas, merchandise sales, events and tours. Other activities rely on registration fees. Sales and sponsorships are all very important sources of revenue and usually help organizations to raise discretionary funds. In contrast, grant funded through the government, corporate entities, and foundations are almost always program or project specific, and they tend to be competitive and require you to make a well-conceived, defensible case for that funding. So in the field of historic preservation, which is what I do, we work with historic buildings and archaeological sites. We assign values to our projects in the following ways. Architecture is the most obvious. Their craftsmanship, solid construction, use of materials, and precedent-setting designs give credibility to calls for their restoration. When a compatible use can be found, the case becomes even more compelling. Such projects tend to require an inordinate amount of intervention, planning, and ultimately loads of money. We can usually make a strong case for their architectural and historical value and their desirability in all of their views. Quality of life is often the greatest contribution to cultural resource projects that they make to a community. Emphasis here can be on things such as the value of buildings, planning, zoning policies, and that protect the community, affordability, and cultural vibrancy. So here in Sapulpa, the community is prioritizing character and walkability and safety over economic return. The incentive is to protect the historic character and scale that has gained support from the merchants, health professionals, and developers who understand that walkability and access to services foster better outcomes for their community. They received a federal grant just to do street improvements. The Threet Filling Station represents not only a building preservation win, but also a win for documentation, interpretation, and sharing an important American story. In this case, the history of an African American experience in Oklahoma, as well as along Route 66. So Route 66 projects like this not only capitalize on their adaptive potential, but also on their rich historical associations. Economic development is another way we position cultural resource projects in grant writing. Since the early 1970s, cultural resources have stewards and activists that have been highlighting the impressive economic development potential of buildings to be reused and for community revitalization. Enid's Main Street, shown here, through the years has attracted financial investments, other economic incentives, and planning considerations based on an anticipated strong economic return on investment, including job creation, increased sales revenue, property taxes, and more. Projects that can be positioned with a clear economic outcome and hailed for their catalytic potential are well positioned to seek funding. And in this case, downtown Enid, because it has done so well, has developed their own preservation grant. Their Main Street program offers it and helps them to do things like take off those hideous metal facades that were put on in the 60s and restore the historic building behind it. So what are the funding sources that people use for this type of thing? Candid's Foundation Directory is by far the largest database of nonprofit funding. It details the funding sources, the mission of those sources, the application process, deadline, and information about past grant recipients. You can purchase a subscription to the directory for an annual fee or access it via a public library in your community. While comprehensive and highly searchable, the directory can be daunting. It might offer hundreds of possible matches with your project, but those matches still need to be further vetted using other source information. Never underestimate the value of Google. Type in key terms like funding for economic development, funding for historic preservation. Come on in. You're fine, don't worry about it. The possibilities are endless, and the search will yield lots of exciting leads. But like those on Candid, they will need to be further vetted for you to see if your project really matches with their criteria. Please keep in mind, while these searches sound promising, many organizations do not accept unsolicited applications. When people call our office looking for funds, I tell them we haven't had funds for rehabilitation or restoration projects since the 1980s, and I don't expect to see them in my lifetime. And while that doesn't sound promising, it is the reality of what the State Historic Preservation Office has to deal with. However, in the preservation world, over the past 25 years that I've been doing this, I can't remember a time where governmental funding was ever as available as it is right now. This is the highest level of funding that the government has, and you should take advantage of it right now. Agencies like the National Park Service has fully funded their Save America's Treasures and other underrepresented resources grant, which brings substantial funding to the table. But also the thing to keep in mind politically is that when a Democrat is in office, grants are more available. When Republicans are in office, tax credits are available. So it just depends on how you want to spin your story to get your money. So really you need to look at comparable projects. Look at places that already have money as your example. Find a project that is similar to yours, to your building, to your region, or to your community, and investigate where those projects secured funding to find your own sources of funding. And here I wanted to make sure you saw some local examples of things that have been done. This is the Dunbar School in Atoka, an unrestored photo on the one side, and then to the left is the restored image. But this has been converted into residential housing. And what they did, they turned it into modest apartments in the historic school, and then they built additional buildings behind it that are low to moderate income housing. That was a drastic need in Atoka. So there are ways to take historic buildings and adapt them into modern uses. Of course, the best source of information is your own network. Your board members, city or county commission members, peer organizations, even peer organizations in related fields, and most especially your current funders. A very not well-kept secret is that funders talk to one another. No foundation, government agency, or institution will ever be able to give away enough money to meet the needs that they care about. So it's in their interest to know and support other funders who share common interests. They often see it as part of their role to help you access other sources. So talk to your current funders. They have knowledge that they're willing to share about how to get those funds. Now, once you've found a source that you think may be interested in funding your project, you need to make a compelling and credible case. So let's take a moment to run through a few of the key ways you can position your project for success. You need to know your audience. You need to know how to have a conversation. You need to be able to tell a story. And if you're historians, you can all spin a story. And you need to show progress for your project. So with your audience, there is no distinction between advocacy and fundraising. In both, you are seeking support of some kind for a project you believe in. The surest way to their pocketbook is through their heart. If you're approaching a funding source, you likely already know they care about your project. Look carefully at how the funding sources work and what their mission statement is. Suddenly, this computer isn't working. Wait a minute, there we go. Okay. Understand its mission statement, its criteria, and their requirements. Look even closer at the projects they've funded in the past, and try to highlight the features of your project and describe its benefits using the terms you find in their documents and their project descriptions. Of course, don't lie, right? If you sense that the funder is particularly interested in senior living and welfare, for for example, figure out if there's a way for your project that will benefit the demographic that they're looking at. Similarly, if a foundation has a strong green bent, if a foundation has a focus on the environment, focus on those aspects of your project that increase energy efficiency or in other ways to reduce climate impact. I'm not suggesting that you simply parrot what you read, but I'm urging you to understand that your audience interest and their inclinations are what drives how they make those decisions, so make sure you're using them to your benefit. Communication is a two-way street, and where there's a relationship, communication becomes easier, enjoyable, and beneficial. Most funders consider themselves partners in efforts to do good work, to spur change, and to build better communities. They don't necessarily want to tell you what to do, but they likely do have an idea, they have experience, and they have examples that can help you. Always begin your search for funding with conversations. The first ask shouldn't be for their money. The first ask should be for information and ideas. This can be over phone, by email, or in person. Now, of course, foundation program officers are as busy as everyone, and so be respectful of their time and sincere in your desire to connect with them. You will find that you have a lot to learn from them, and your project will be better received if it evolves from a place of communication. Funding organizations want to know the backstory, the context, the players, and the outcome, but they want it to be told to them in an interesting and concise way. Emphasis on concise. You're all historians, so you probably say a lot more than you need to. Paint them a passionate and engaging picture of what you're asking them to support. The best investment you can make is to take the time to tell the story. Edit the story, refine the story, and bring the story to life. But keep it authentic and true. And then it's easy to demonstrate how many meals you've served, or how many children you've healed, how many housing units you've built, but it's harder to quantify historic preservation. But it is a numbers game. So numbers of meals don't really mean anything unless you say, we served 1,000 meals to 1,000 school-aged children who would have otherwise not eaten. So yes, these projects tend to be about saving buildings, but perhaps it's also about creating jobs, about stimulating economic recovery, about creating economic diversity. Try to quantify it because that's what many funders are looking for. They want to know how you are impacting your community. But also talk about how you're moving from A to B, B to C, and C to D. How does your project change the game and describe a world in which the game has changed? So I know it feels like securing the grant and reporting on the grant and dealing with the donor is harder than actually doing the good work. But the reality is that most funders are under as much pressure as you to meet certain performance measures and outcomes to justify their work. So before you pursue a grant, be sure that you have the willingness and the wherewithal to comply with all the requirements. Assume that they are in place for a reason and not just to make you crazy. Act in a spirit of gratitude. If you don't believe that or you can't believe in that spirit, then step away from the grant application. If you can respect and abide by the guidelines, then by all means apply for the money. File the reports on time and know that your conscientiousness and graciousness will be rewarded. So let's look at a few examples of where you can find these funds, because that's really what this is about, right? How do you get the money? So the National Trust is a national example. In addition to general preservation funds, the Trust has in recent years been able to raise substantial funds to redirect to local projects through their African American Cultural Heritage Action Fund and through their Sacred Sites Fund. I will mention, if you have a historic church, that's almost impossible to get funding for, but the National Trust is one source that you can go to. They funded the Threet filling station with grants. And did you know that they also have funds specifically for Route 66 projects? So in Oklahoma and all the states that Route 66 crosses, each state in the National Trust has its own pot of funds. So you can go to them and say, I have this project on Route 66, a building project that we need to restore a building. Can I apply for your grant? And they'll give you that information. They accept applications 3 times a year for that funding source. Partners for Sacred Places is another good example of a resource specific, in this case, religious properties for funding sources. And again, churches are one that we get calls about the most, and they are the hardest to come by. The other one that I always tell people to check on is their diocese. Go to your headquarters for whatever religious institution you are and see what kind of funds they have available. A lot of them have like basic funding grants available for things like handicap ramps or making modifications to staircases to make them ADA compliant. So if that's an issue that your congregation has, you can go to your diocese for that. American Express is one of the largest corporate contributors on a national scale, and it supports a wide range of projects. But as you can imagine, they like to direct their funding to markets where they either have a strong customer base or they're trying to build a customer base. So those around here, I think they've funded quite a few projects. So you'd be safe in applying there. Now, the Jewish American Society for Historic Preservation. You might think, why is Lynda even talking about that for Oklahoma? But Oklahoma has a very long history associated with the Julius Rosenwald Fund. And the Jewish American Society for Historic Preservation is willing to fund historic markers at Rosenwald school locations as long as their organization is allowed to put their name on the marker and gets credit in the press release. So if you've got a Rosenwald school location and the building doesn't even have to be there, they'll still help pay for that marker to be installed. So let's talk about some common visions. I'm going to put up 3 examples of mission statements. I think they show that preservation organizations really do share a common agenda with each other. We all work to make our communities stronger, healthier, more vibrant, and now more than ever, more equitable and just. So everything happens in place, right? We live, work, receive health care and education in a physical place. Cultural research projects, by their very nature, are about place. Preserving places, enlivening places, sustaining places, and I would argue that our work to place has a role in just about every aspect of our community. As preservationists and cultural heritage stewards, we own place. Here are a few examples. Commercial places like the Altus Main Street and Film Row in Oklahoma City, cultural attractions like the Edmond History Museum, sacred places like the Wichita Mountains, and places that still look for modern functions like the Blackwell Armory. These places are powerful for their historic and cultural associations, but they are also powerful for what they bring to the table today. They can be used in the service of meeting contemporary needs and furthering contemporary objectives. To put it bluntly, they are immensely relevant, and we need to just talk about them in that way. So who are our preservation partners? These are healthcare professionals who understand that the built environment is important to health and well-being. They will champion cultural resource projects that further their aim. Community program sponsors that address public benefit activities that need homes, like social services, education, children programs, and food centers. They're job creators. Can your projects serve to stimulate jobs or serve as a place to train new volunteers and workers? Housing developers. Large and small communities are facing a shortage of affordable housing. Can your project take advantage of local, state, and federal funding incentives to create affordable housing? Educational institutions historically have not been great partners for historic preservation. An example, UCO demoed 400 houses for their expansion in the 1960s. So the tide, though, is changing. More and more universities are realizing that their campuses are not an island, and what is happening in their communities affects their brand and the educational experience for their students. So look at institutions in your area to see if there are ways to creatively partner to carry out your projects. If you're associated with OU, IQC, the Institute for Quality Communities, does a lot for small communities in terms of preservation, redevelopment of downtowns, figuring out walkability. Students do the project, and it's free, right? Because it's students who have to do like capstone projects and things like that. So learn about those resources and take advantage of them. So I hope what I've made clear is that we need to talk about our cultural resource projects, not just in terms of the resource itself, but how it benefits people and how it might address contemporary needs. Your time is now, and we need to develop projects for both the resource and the people aspect in mind. So Benedictine Heights Hospital. This is a building up in Guthrie, and it had fallen into disrepair. It had no windows, graffiti all over the inside of it, vacant building. It now serves for a community of 62 and over with low to moderate income apartments. So who is most interested in your project? Who will directly benefit from its success? Who in your community sees the value in this work? If you can figure that out, you get the funders to follow your project. So we're going to look at 2 examples today. So the Douglas, located here in Oklahoma City. It's located in northeast Oklahoma City and was the only all-black high school during the period of segregation. Construction began in 1910 when the school was locally known as Lowell Elementary School and also served white students at the time. In 1933, the school was designated as a segregated school. And in 1975, the school became a community center and ultimately closed in 1993. The first African-American school in Oklahoma City, it became one of the leading educational institutions in the region. So historically, this historic building, now known as the Douglas, has been converted into 60 apartments by SCG Development Colony Partners. The joint venture partners have also constructed the Douglas next door, a new building that provides an additional 68 affordable apartments. So the outcome for this project is that the development, which features a mix of studio, 1- and 2-bedroom units, help meet the housing needs of families earning no more than 60% of the area median income. Colony Partners also completed a nearby market rate housing development. The audience is that the work is a big step in the redevelopment of the John F. Kennedy neighborhood in northeast Oklahoma City. The partners, this is where you want to know. The financing of approximately $32 million of housing development. The team used 2 powerful financial tools, the low-income housing tax credit and the historic preservation tax credit. They also received tax-exempt bonds as part of the financing package. The Oklahoma Housing Finance Agency awarded $1.5 million in 4% housing credits and $21 million in multifamily bonds. Stratford Capital Group, SCG's sister company, then syndicated the credits to raise equity for the project. Oklahoma City, Wells Fargo, Freddie Mac, and Arvis Bank provided additional funding for the project. So they leveraged multiple partners to make this project happen, a $32 million project. Most people aren't going to be able to walk into the bank and get a loan for $32 million. So it really came down to being able to syndicate the tax credits that they were getting, and what that just means. Most commonly, people say, "Oh, I sold my tax credits," right? And so they don't get dollar for dollar. So $32 million, you're getting a 20% tax credit, federal tax credit for historic preservation. Typically, when you syndicate that, you might get 15% of that from the person that you're syndicating with, but that's money that you didn't have otherwise. So you can technically sell your tax credits to get the money you need to do your project. Yes, sir?
Who spearheaded that project? In other words, who took the lead? Because it took a lot of, as you say, partners and a lot of coordination to make that happen.
SCG was the development director for that project. SCG?
SCG.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yep.
Is that a local organization?
Yeah. So And the other one would be the Threet Filling Station. This is located along Route 66, the road's only known Black American-owned and operated gas station and cafe, served as a safe haven for Black travelers during the Jim Crow era from threats of violence, including racism and lynching in sundown towns. So it's listed on the National Register in 1995, listed on the National Trust for Historic Preservation's Most Endangered Places in 2021, received their first National Trust grant from the African American Cultural Heritage Action Fund, received a National Park Service Route 66 grant for rehabilitation of the building, which included the roof and interior work. And in July of 2023, the National Trust HOPE project, which stands for Hands-On Preservation Experience, in conjunction with students from the Guthrie Job Corps, spent time at this site to help fix various issues, including restoring the graffiti stone masonry and using donated paint from Benjamin Moore to complete the exterior painting at the building. Okay.
Slide pause.
And so with this one in particular, this is a family-owned project. This family has owned it since the early 1900s, since about 1901. They've owned this. They've owned almost 120 acres out here. They have the original home site, which is located smack in the middle of the property. The Threet Filling Station on the corner of Route 66 and County Line Road, but also a family bar that's adjacent to the filling station. The Negro League used to play baseball out there, so there's a baseball complex out there. There's a lot of things that happened on this particular property. So there are a lot of different organizations that are very interested in seeing this develop. So the National Trust came on board right away with grant funds. The National Park Service said it was an obvious interest of theirs because of the rarity of the resource. And now, because it's considered so rare, we're looking at giving this one the highest designation it can receive. We're preparing a National Historic Landmark designation for this property. So because of that, because of this elevated significance of this property, it has opened itself up to all sorts of grant funding. And they're absolutely taking advantage of it. But they're also getting it from other sources. I ran into a developer one night with a group of my friends. He was like, "Didn't I just see you on TV talking about the Threet Filling Station?" "Yeah, I guess you did, sure." He goes, "Great. I own a landscaping company who does sports complexes, and I want to volunteer our time to restore their baseball field."
Wow.
"Great, let me connect you." And so, I mean, the sources are just coming out of the woodwork for this project. But again, it's about having that compelling story and being able to tell it. And we've got lots of ways to do that with this particular one, but find that source to be able to tell that story.
But all these improvements are being made to privately owned property?
Yes, they are.
Interesting.
And in this case, what you see here are the students working. And it was fascinating to talk to them because these were all either high school kids or right out of high school. And they were working with the Guthrie Job Corps. And they didn't know the history of the building, which was fascinating because of the types of kids that we had out here. But then it was about teaching them skills. And they didn't realize how hard it is to find actual contractors, skilled laborers who can do preservation work. And the man who was teaching them to do this was like, "I charge $150 to $200 an hour to do what I do. When you walk away from this 2 weeks with me, you'll be able to command that price because you'll be able to do masonry repairs." And those kids, I keep saying they're kids. They're not kids, they're adults. We're so excited. And 3 of them left there to go work for other construction companies and took that experience and gained from it. One of them was a female, and she went right away to work for Mid-Continent Construction. They were all over hiring her because a female who knows how to do masonry work, she was a shoo-in for getting a job. So again, you have to be able to talk about these 4 items. You know, what is your project outcome? Include a restored building. Is it including an on-site job creation? Is it workforce training? What is the public benefit, and was it well conceived? Who are your partners? Many want to see this project succeed. A long family history, preservation community, philanthropic community, local community members all want to see you succeed at what you're doing. Who is your audience? Is it the local community? Is it the travelers along Route 66? Who are they? And know that your story has to be compelling to them. And then remember, you need to be able to contact those funding sources, such as the family, local banks, the National Trust, the National Park Service. And I'm not even talking about federal sources availability. I mean, I could sit here for another 3 hours and talk to you about all the federal money that I know is available and ways to get it. And I'm happy to do that for you if you have questions afterwards. But, you know, you've got to be able to address these types of things in order to get that funding. So, kind of wrap it up. Cultural resource projects can nurture healthy communities, create resilient and vibrant communities, and when they do that, they are highly fundable.